I was suing Will for $200 million because that video is going to be there forever. You do not have the right to walk up on stage and smack somebody in the face because they said words.
Oh, wow! Wow!
The incident itself was over in seconds, but the response that followed exposed something far larger than a single loss of control. When Will Smith returned to his seat after striking Chris Rock on live television, the room did not recoil. It recalibrated. The broadcast continued. Laughter resurfaced. And before the night ended, the same man was standing on stage again, receiving a prolonged standing ovation. That reaction was not confusion. It was conditioning. Inside that room sat executives, producers, agents, and financiers, people whose careers are built on stability and marketable faces. In that moment, the question was never whether the act crossed a line. It was whether acknowledging that line would threaten the system that had benefited from him for decades. For nearly 30 years, Will Smith represented the safest kind of star. His films generated billions. His public image was relentlessly positive, carefully protected, and endlessly profitable. When the slap happened, that image fractured in real time. But the applause that followed revealed the industry's reflex: protect the asset, manage the damage, and move forward. Live television removes the safety net. There was no edit, no delay, no publicist stepping in front of the cameras. What audiences witnessed was not just a moment of violence. They saw an institution quietly signal what matters most when reputation and revenue collide. That night forced a reckoning, not just with one actor's behavior, but with the unspoken rules that govern Hollywood itself. Accountability appeared negotiable. Power was not. And once that imbalance became visible, it opened the door for people who had long stayed silent or been ignored to finally speak openly about what they had been watching all along.
I was sickened. I was sickened by the standing ovation. I felt like Hollywood is just spineless, en masse. And it really felt like, oh, this is a really clear indication that we're not the cool club anymore.
The first major crack in the industry's silence came from someone who had nothing to gain by speaking at all. Jim Carrey wasn't promoting a movie. He wasn't chasing relevance. He was reacting as an observer who had spent decades inside the same system and no longer felt obligated to protect it. When Carrey said he was sickened by what he saw, he wasn't talking only about Will Smith. He was talking about the standing ovation, about the collective decision to applaud instead of confront. To Carrey, that moment confirmed something he had felt for years, that Hollywood no longer operated on principles, only optics. The applause wasn't forgiveness. It was insulation. Carrey's criticism cut deeper because of who he is. He helped redefine movie stardom in the 1990s by doing the opposite of what was expected. He leaned into absurdity, rejected polish, and refused to behave like a traditional leading man. And over time, that rebellion evolved into something more philosophical. Carrey became openly critical of fame itself, arguing that celebrity identities were manufactured masks that eventually trapped the people wearing them. That framework shaped how he interpreted the Oscars incident. In his view, the slap wasn't about defending honor or protecting a spouse. It was about an image under threat. A persona that had been built, refined, and monetized for decades suddenly felt exposed. And when that image was challenged publicly, the response was immediate and explosive. Carrey described it as an avatar, a false self that demands constant validation. The more successful the avatar becomes, the harder it is to escape. Any perceived attack feels existential. From that perspective, the outburst wasn't premeditated. It was the result of long-suppressed pressure finally finding a release point. What unsettled Carrey most wasn't the act itself, but how easily the system absorbed it. No pause, no real consequence in the moment, just applause and forward motion. To him, that wasn't strength. It was proof that the industry had lost the ability or the willingness to stand for anything beyond its own survival.
It's very simple. There's three things you do. Just do these three things. Pay your taxes, mind your business, and keep Will Smith's wife's name out!
While Jim Carrey approached the situation like a philosopher dissecting a system, Eddie Murphy chose a different weapon: silence. For years, Murphy had largely removed himself from Hollywood's public rituals. He didn't campaign. He didn't linger at award shows. He didn't play the visibility game that modern celebrity demands. That absence made his eventual reappearance impossible to ignore. When Murphy stepped onto the stage at the Golden Globe Awards to accept the Cecil B. DeMille Award, the room understood the weight of the moment. This was not a man known for participation. He had spent decades openly criticizing the artificiality of award culture, describing it as a room full of people performing versions of themselves for validation. And yet, there he was, finally accepting an honor he could not realistically decline. Then came the line, calm, measured, and delivered without flourish. Pay your taxes, mind your business, and keep Will Smith's wife's name out of your mouth. The audience laughed, but the laughter carried tension. Everyone knew exactly what he was referencing. It wasn't a punchline chasing applause. It was a boundary being drawn. Murphy later made it clear that the remark wasn't crafted for shock value. It was a statement, a reminder of an unspoken rule that comedians have always understood. Jokes are not acts of violence. Crossing that line changes the rules for everyone. And coming from Murphy, one of the architects of modern stand-up and film comedy, the message landed with authority. What made the moment resonate wasn't just the jab at Will Smith. It was who delivered it. Murphy had nothing to promote, no brand to protect, and no need to ingratiate himself with the industry. His career had already been written into history. That freedom gave his words weight. In a single sentence, Murphy did what Hollywood had avoided since the Oscars. He acknowledged the incident, rejected the justification, and moved on without theatrics. And by doing so, he exposed how rare it had become for anyone inside the system to speak plainly, especially when money, image, and power are at stake.
Yeah, that was a horrific night, as you can imagine. At the end of the day, I lost it, you know. And I guess what I would say, you just never know what somebody's going through. It was a lot of things. It was the little boy that watched his father beat up his mother. You know, it's all of that just bubbled up in that moment.
To understand why Eddie Murphy's words mattered so much, you have to understand what award shows have become. They are not neutral celebrations of art. They are carefully managed performances where reputation, optics, and business interests intersect. Every camera angle, every reaction shot, every applause cue serves a purpose. The goal is not truth. It is stability. Awards culture depends on a shared agreement to play along. Winners express gratitude. Losers smile graciously. Controversy is softened, redirected, or delayed until it can be managed privately. What happened at the Academy Awards broke that agreement. Not because violence occurred, but because it happened without permission, outside the script, and in front of a global audience. The standing ovation for Will Smith was the system correcting itself in real time. It was damage control disguised as support. By applauding, the room reframed the moment from misconduct to redemption. It allowed the show to proceed and reassured investors, studios, and advertisers that nothing had truly gone wrong. This is why Murphy's comment at the Golden Globe Awards carried more weight than a formal condemnation ever could. He didn't issue a statement. He didn't call for consequences. He simply reminded everyone of a basic boundary that had been deliberately blurred. And in doing so, he highlighted how unnatural the silence had become. The contrast between the two nights was striking. At the Oscars, restraint disappeared, but accountability vanished with it. At the Golden Globes, the joke functioned as a correction, a quiet acknowledgement that something fundamental had been crossed, even if the industry refused to say it outright. Award shows thrive on the illusion of moral authority. They present themselves as arbiters of excellence and cultural values. But moments like these expose the truth. They are marketplaces of influence, where behavior is tolerated or condemned based on risk assessment, not ethics. Once that reality becomes visible, the speeches and applause lose their innocence. And when audiences start recognizing the performance for what it is, the power of the ceremony itself begins to weaken. That erosion, more than any single joke or incident, is what Hollywood fears most.
To our cover story, Jada Pinkett Smith and Will Smith got candid on Red Table Talk, confirming that Jada had a relationship with another man when the duo was separated. Take a look.
So that's what we're going to start with. This is a very personal journey.
Yeah.
That became very public.
I think you need to say clearly what happened.
Yeah, and then I got into an entanglement with August. That's what I said.
An entanglement?
Yes. Yes.
A relationship?
Yes, it was a relationship.
I wasn't sure I was ever going to speak to you again.
I know.
Yeah, like the fact that I'm speaking to you again is a miracle.
The conversation shifts when you look beyond the award stage and into the way personal turmoil was repackaged for public consumption. Red Table Talk became the clearest example of how vulnerability, when carefully controlled, can be transformed into a strategic asset. What appeared to be raw honesty was, in reality, tightly managed storytelling. When Jada Pinkett Smith publicly discussed her relationship with August Alsina, the framing mattered more than the facts themselves. The setting was intimate, the tone was confessional, and at the center of it all sat Will Smith, positioned not as a participant in chaos, but as a wounded figure choosing forgiveness. The narrative was precise, pain was acknowledged, but control never left the room. That episode didn't damage Will Smith's image in the way scandals traditionally do. Instead, it redirected attention. Sympathy replaced scrutiny. Questions about power, boundaries, and accountability were softened by emotion. By presenting himself as the long-suffering husband, Smith reclaimed moral authority in a situation that could have easily stripped it away. This is where Jim Carrey's criticism of constructed identities becomes relevant again. The interview wasn't just a marital conversation, it was image maintenance. The public was invited into a private space, but only on carefully defined terms. The mess was visible, but the conclusion was already written. For many viewers, the moment became entertainment rather than introspection. Clips circulated, memes followed. The seriousness of the situation dissolved into spectacle. And while attention focused on the confession, other narratives quietly disappeared from the conversation altogether. Red Table Talk wasn't unique in doing this. It was simply more transparent. It demonstrated how modern celebrity no longer avoids scandal. It absorbs it, reframes it, and monetizes it. Pain becomes content. Accountability becomes optional. And the person controlling the narrative decides who walks away damaged and who emerges redeemed. By the time the Oscars incident occurred, this strategy was already familiar. The public had been trained to watch deeply personal moments unfold without demanding resolution. That conditioning didn't start on a stage. It started at a table.
I could not do a 30-year celebration of this show and not celebrate you.
Very abusive marriage.
You know, I have children.
Yeah.
I've been divorced and got a second marriage, and I can see now the level of pain and the level of struggle that it was for you just to show up every day.
Long before the Oscars or televised confessions, there were signs of how power operated behind the scenes. One of the earliest and most telling examples played out during the original run of The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. At the center of it was Janet Hubert, the actress who originated the role of Aunt Viv and helped establish the emotional foundation of the show. After 3 seasons, Hubert was suddenly gone. The public explanation was simple and damaging. She was labeled difficult, unprofessional, and unwilling to cooperate. It was a familiar narrative, especially in Hollywood, and it spread quickly. When Daphne Maxwell Reid replaced her, the show moved forward as if nothing had happened. The story was closed. Years later, Hubert offered a different account. She said the conflict stemmed from a contract dispute, not ego. According to her, she pushed back against terms she believed were unfair and was punished for it. Once negotiations broke down, the machinery turned against her. And rather than defending a co-star, Will Smith aligned himself with the version of events that protected the show and his own rising status. The consequences were severe. Hubert described losing opportunities, credibility, and professional momentum almost overnight. In the entertainment industry, being labeled difficult is often irreversible. And for a dark-skinned black woman, the cost was even higher. The accusation didn't just end a role, it reshaped a career. What makes the situation resonate now is how consistent it feels with later patterns. Control of the narrative mattered more than fairness. Stability mattered more than loyalty. Once a story was agreed upon by those in power, it became reality, regardless of who it harmed. When the cast reunited decades later, the tension was still visible. Hubert spoke openly about the damage done and the silence that allowed it to happen. The moment wasn't about reconciliation as much as acknowledgement, an admission that success had come with compromises that were never evenly distributed. Looking back, the Aunt Viv controversy wasn't an isolated incident. It was an early demonstration of how influence works when one voice carries more weight than another, and how easily inconvenient truths can be rewritten when protecting the brand becomes the priority.
It's big, it's awesome. I mean, it's Will Smith. What do you expect?
If you're making a movie, you're making a movie. But don't move your gym in here. Don't move your, it's about 6 times the size of a mobile home. It's insanity. Look at the size of that thing. I mean, how can you can't walk a few blocks like everyone else and book a room in a hotel or something? You know what I'm saying?
It's crazy. It's all on Mercer Street and then down Broome Street and down here. It's blocking. There's nobody can park. There's no traffic coming through. It's awful. It's obscene. It's Will Smith, and he's got a gym supposedly. Ridiculous. Just ridiculous. Who the fuck is he?
By the time Will Smith reached the height of his movie power, the rules no longer applied to him in ordinary ways. One of the clearest examples came during the production of Men in Black 3 in New York City. Despite owning property in the city, Smith requested a massive double-decker trailer be parked near the filming location. The unit was not subtle. It stretched over 50 feet, included a private gym, and reportedly cost millions to install and maintain. The trailer was placed in a residential area of Soho, blocking streets, disrupting local businesses, and generating constant noise and exhaust. Residents complained. City officials were contacted, and yet nothing changed. Production continued, and the trailer stayed exactly where it was. What made the situation remarkable wasn't the luxury itself. Hollywood stars are accustomed to comfort. It was the refusal to compromise. Smith had alternatives. Hotels were available. His own apartment was nearby, but none of that mattered. The expectation was that the inconvenience of others was simply the cost of accommodating him. When criticism surfaced, it was quietly managed. The story never became a scandal. No apology followed. The production wrapped, the trailer disappeared, and the city moved on. But the incident left behind a clear message. When someone is valuable enough, disruption is tolerated. This kind of privilege doesn't appear overnight. It develops gradually, reinforced by years of special treatment and a lack of meaningful pushback. Each accommodation becomes a precedent. Each exception becomes normal. Over time, the line between professional necessity and personal entitlement fades. Seen in hindsight, the trailer controversy fits neatly into a larger pattern. It wasn't about a vehicle or a location. It was about boundaries and how easily they dissolve when an industry decides someone is too important to confront. That mindset, once ingrained, doesn't stay contained. It follows people wherever they go. Once the protective barrier around a public figure starts to weaken, stories that once circulated quietly tend to resurface. That shift doesn't automatically validate every claim, but it does change how willing people are to listen. In Will Smith's case, a series of allegations and rumors long dismissed or ignored began drawing renewed attention after the Oscars incident. One of the most discussed figures in this wave was Bilal Salam, a former associate of Smith. His claims, shared publicly years after their professional relationship ended, described personal situations that, if taken at face value, contradicted the carefully maintained public image. These accounts are unverified and remain allegations, but their persistence is notable. Assistants and close associates occupy a unique position. They see what outsiders do not, and when relationships end, silence is no longer guaranteed. Similar claims have been echoed by Jaguar Wright, who alleged that inappropriate behavior occurred within elite celebrity circles under the guise of mentorship. Her statements are also unproven and disputed, but they contribute to a broader pattern. Accusations that question not just individual actions, but the culture that enables secrecy. Even earlier, Alexis Arquette made remarks before her death, suggesting that aspects of Will Smith's private life had been deliberately concealed to protect his marketability during an era when Hollywood was far less tolerant of deviation from a carefully constructed image. These claims were never substantiated and should be treated cautiously, but they align with the reality of how aggressively studios once guarded their stars. None of these stories, on their own, constitute proof. What matters is why they survived at all. For years, they lingered on the margins, dismissed as gossip. After the Oscars, the context changed. The perception of untouchability cracked, and with it came a willingness to re-examine narratives that had previously been considered off-limits. This is the cost of building an image that cannot bend. When pressure finally forces a fracture, everything that was buried beneath the surface rises at once. Truth and rumor collide, and the distinction becomes harder for the public to parse. That confusion isn't accidental. It's the byproduct of a system that values preservation over transparency. After the Oscars, the consequences didn't arrive all at once. They unfolded quietly, through distance rather than denunciation. Will Smith was not erased from Hollywood, but the certainty that once surrounded his career was gone. Projects stalled. Appearances became rare. Support turned cautious. The release of Emancipation was meant to signal redemption. It was positioned as a serious, prestige project, one that leaned into history, suffering, and moral gravity. In another era, it would have been received as proof of range and resilience. Instead, it arrived burdened by context. Audiences watched through a different lens, and the response reflected that shift. Box office numbers disappointed. Awards momentum never materialized. This wasn't about punishment. It was about risk. Studios and partners didn't suddenly develop principles. They developed hesitation. For the first time in decades, Will Smith was no longer the safest bet in the room. The certainty that his presence guaranteed returns had dissolved, replaced by questions no one needed to ask before. The irony is that the industry's restraint had little to do with morality. The same system that applauded him hours after the slap now kept him at arm's length. Not because violence mattered, but because controversy complicates marketing. Silence became the new form of management. What changed most was the audience. Viewers who once accepted the image without resistance began noticing the performance behind it. Moments that would have passed unnoticed before were now re-examined. The distance between persona and person felt wider, harder to ignore. For someone whose career depended on universal appeal, that shift was seismic. When trust erodes, even subtly, it alters everything that follows. Scripts read differently. Speeches land differently. Apologies feel calculated rather than sincere. The Oscars didn't end a career. They ended an era of insulation. And once that protection disappeared, Will Smith faced something unfamiliar, not cancellation, but exposure. For the first time in 30 years, there was no clean narrative left to retreat into, and no institution eager to rebuild it for him. After everything you've seen, do you think this was a single breaking point, or the moment a carefully protected image finally collapsed under its own weight? Share your thoughts in the comments, and click the video next to this one to dive even deeper into how similar patterns have played out with other powerful public figures.